I remember being sat there in a hospital bed with a nurse holding my foot, and she raised my leg, saying my leg was going to be okay, and then she kept on walking past 45 degrees. The reality was I just had my ACL, PCL and MCL broken in half by getting kicked by a horse, saving my ex-partner, after I just signed my first rugby professional contract at Doncaster Knights. In that moment, I realized what actually means for your identity to have to shift, because physical crisis in that regard is the thing that built me. I now run a company called Built for Pressure. If you have not been here before, my name is Will Foden. I'm an ex-professional rugby player, dad, husband, and someone who's a performance consultant to leaders under pressure in general. I have been built through physical endeavor. Most people on platforms that talk around executive performance talk about things that are high in the sky thinking. They talk about self-help books or spreadsheets. This video is going to give you an origin story about where I'm from, what actually built me, what it means to be built for pressure, and what my version of what it means to actually perform at your best means. Ever since I was a kid, sport has been the narrative throughout my whole process. For as long as I can remember, I've played multiple different sports at multiple different ages, competing at county standard across cricket, tennis, rugby, and through javelin for London. I actually got onto the road to Wimbledon for tennis, playing at county men's level when I was 14 and captaining at Queen's, which was a very weird experience when I rocked up in a tracksuit and the bloke I was playing against was in an Aston Martin. But ever since I was a youngster, I had a dream of playing professional sport. And that's been my whole geared system, personally, from an education standpoint, from a physical standpoint, and from an emotional standpoint too. I come from a very, very loving family. I'm originally from Brentford, West London. I'm from the Brentford that actually was not a very nice place compared to now, where it's £2 million for a house on the canal. When I lived there, it was not like that. But vice versa, I don't come from this rags to riches story. I don't come from this, my parents were drug addicts and crackheads and all this kind of stuff. I came from a very loving family. But the key narrative was, I was on the straight and narrow purely on the basis that sport gave me that crux, gave me that focus, and took me away from all the madness and stupidity that other friends of mine that were doing. As I said, at 16 years old, I went to the road to Wimbledon, and I got to the game. I was against a small kid, and he smashed me 6-1, 6-love. And that's where I suddenly realized that the reality was my emotions got ahead of me. I used to be that kind of tennis player that I'd beat them 6-1, 6-love, or I'd lose 6-1, 6-love because I couldn't keep my emotions at bay. And I remember going back home to my dad and saying, Dad, I just don't feel alive playing tennis. I want to play rugby. And that's where the fixation of playing professional rugby came from. I decided to leave home at 16. I left London and I moved to Gloucester, to Hartpury, where everyone, if you guys follow along with rugby, is one of the most dominant rugby forces in the country. And I started in the third team. I was never a gifted rugby player. I was never a gifted athlete. I was always this stubborn, aggressive little white boy who refused to quit, who was willing to outwork everybody. And I had the same premise for my rugby career. And in the first year, I went from third team to captain of the 18s. I then signed for Gloucester Rugby, played in their academy. And I did the same thing at university. I pushed myself to a physical limit there as much as my knowledge would tolerate until I realized I had to get better. And that's where I invested in my education. I took a degree in strength and conditioning. I ended up taking a master's degree in coaching science, and everything was geared for me to be a better athlete and high performer. That was the number one piece. And this is where the difference that makes the difference lies. I've not been that person that has built health, energy, and performance. I've not just been that person that's built nutrition and lifestyle intervention. I've been the educator, the consultant, the coach who's dealt at the forefront of high performance and behavior change. Those are two key traits that I've had ever since I was a youngster. And as I said, I've been studying this since I was 16. I then actually, to be honest, I had a scholarship at Hartpury and I was getting outworked by an opposite number. So I decided, he was older than me, I decided to leave. I handed back my scholarship and I moved down to Stourbridge, which then ended up being at Cinderford Rugby Club. Shout out to the boys. And that's where I cut my teeth into what it took to be a semi-professional outfit, which is the third, which is, you've obviously in the UK, if you guys don't know, you've got Premiership, and then you've got Championship, and you've got National One, Cinderford and National One. And I was playing National One rugby at 19. I then realized the art and the science of playing semi-professional sport against men compared to just playing in minor leagues in an education system. I learned all of my general trade in that team. I learned how to lead. I ended up being the captain after a couple of years, and I captained for 3 years. I realized what leadership meant. I realized that in a team, why I was wired a certain way and why I operated and how that was infectious for others. Cinderfield was just like me as an athlete. They were not the best rugby team. But if you went to Dockham Road and we scalped everybody because nobody actually wanted to play against us, not because we were better than them, but because we were more violent. And that's, again, part of my personality trait is I'm wired for war. I'm aggressive. I want to push my limits, and also I want to bring people up to my level, and more so to see them show their potential. And again, you'll see this stem through everything that I've done. Fast forward, I had a livery yard and equestrian facility with my ex-partner. We had 4 acres, 13 stables, a farm. It looked like on the outside I was making loads of money. I was happy and that we were living the dream. On the internal, I hated my life, apart from rugby. And I'm very, very lucky to have a very supportive family. My mum, my dad, my sister, my friends, my sort of close-knit friends. But in that relationship, I'd outgrown it. And this is kind of where people need to understand when it comes down to identity. In relationships, you have to grow with each other. And reality was, I got with my ex-partner when I was just turning 18. And over 8 years, we outgrew each other. And I wasn't strong enough to say that. I knew deep down that something had to change. I just didn't know how. But luckily, I got my lucky break. Doncaster Knights came down from the championship. They got relegated and they wanted to go straight back up. They had a professional budget inside a semi-professional outfit, and they signed me to get involved. I was there for 8 weeks. Arguably in that 8 weeks, I was the fittest, strongest, leanest I've ever been, and I was pushing to start for that team. I was against other people that had been there a long time, but this was my goal. This was my shot. This is what I'd been dreaming my whole life to do, was play in a professional outfit first team. I played at Gloucester Academy. I went down to Exeter Chiefs for a bit, and I played pre-season with them, and I decided to go back to Hartbury for a master's degree, which again was a double rabbit hole of the reason why I did that was I said it was because it was a good, clever idea to get an education. It wasn't that. It was because I was frightened of becoming someone different and not actually doing something hard. And that's where I learned a huge lesson there. But I was in my house on the weekend. So I used to live in Doncaster, drive back down to Hereford, and my ex-partner was lunging a horse, and the horse turned on her, started trampling her, and she was in between it, getting covered up. And that was the moment my whole life changed. That was the moment where I realized I sunk down to pure survival mode and ran in and got hold of it. I got hold of the lunge line. If you don't know what a lunge line is, if you watch cowboy films, they have it on a long line and it spins round them. I got hold of the lunge line to get it off. The lunge line was on the floor, it wrapped around my leg, and it actually picked me up upside down and dragged me around the school. If I was watching it now, it'd be on You've Been Framed, it was hilarious, but obviously at the time it wasn't. I ended up being able to stop the horse, pulling myself back up to it and grabbed its head collar. And in that moment, everything stopped. It was like the Born Identity. It literally was like my whole world was quiet. And I just was staring it in the face, and I knew exactly what it was going to do. Let go of its head, turned on one foot. As I stepped, 2 feet in the side of my knee fully snapped in half. Massive sound. And the first thing that came to me wasn't pain. It was fear that I'd lost my rugby career. I'd not admitted to myself that I was not happy. And the only thing that made me happy was I had this glimmer of hope of being the person I said that I was going to be, which is a professional athlete. And in that moment, I thought that it had gone. I hobbled out of the school screaming. I remember ringing my mum, screaming down the phone that I'd snapped my leg in half. My mum was laughing. She thought I was joking. And that's when I got rushed to hospital, and I was sat on a gurney wearing a pair of jeans that were old. They were 5 years old, smashed. A t-shirt that I got at a car boot sale, odd wellies, and I was just sat there by myself. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what that meant. I thought my whole world had been crushed. And as I said, the nurse came in, picked up my foot. She goes, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay. You might not have done that much damage." She picked my foot up and she just kept walking. Past 45 degrees, kept going. And she's like, "Oh, we might have to put that back and see what happens later." And she just walked off. That moment there changed my life. Because that physical crisis that I was in totally shifted my identity. It gave me the most amount of focus possible to take hold of my shit and run with it. Because for years, what I'd been doing is I was being a nice guy. I was looking after everybody else. I was making sure everybody else was fine. I was looking after my ex-partner. And I was desperately trying to spin so many plates rather than go for the thing that I said that I wanted to go for. And in that moment, I realized that if you're not selfish and look after yourself, you can never actually operate at the highest level you want to. It was a very, very weird scenario because I ended up losing everything. I moved up to Doncaster. I went home, stayed there for 6 weeks, let the swelling go down. I had a full knee recon, ACL, PCL, and MCL done. My ACL and PCL were done from dead people's ligaments, and my MCL was done with my hamstring, all at the same time. Which at that time, this was what, 12 years ago. This was not done in that way. Usually you do ACL and PCL, then you'd wait and then you'd do your MCL, but they decided to do it at the same time. And I remember just waking up waking up out of the operation, groggy, and I just woke up and I was like, someone get me some fucking drugs. And it was horrific. And I had drainage in my leg. But fast forward, 10 months later, I went through arguably some of the hardest times of my life, lost absolutely everything, all my money. I left me and my ex-partner split. I moved up to Doncaster, just my dog, left all my kit there, left my house, absolutely everything, and rebuilt from the ground up. I remember this being sat there on the sofa with Tia, who was a farm dog, never been in the house properly, with nothing. And I was sat there watching Eric Thomas videos on YouTube because I needed some motivation, and I was absolutely melted, realizing that I had the biggest mountain to climb because no one believed that I could get back and play rugby. Everybody said that it was impossible. The surgeons said, don't be stupid, you'll be lucky to walk properly again, and just be maybe to go and run, you might have knee issues, etc., etc. I went through so much pain to get, I went through 3 operations. I had infections inside of my joint. I had sutures go missing. Sutures burst and have to be reapplied. All sorts. My hamstring got so big on my MCL that it blew the fit in, and I had to have that put back. There was loads of stuff that happened. 10 months later, I ran out against Cross Keys away, starting number 7, and 2 other people that had their knees dislocated that year didn't come back to play. And it's not saying this is not me a massive hoo-ha shout out saying Will Foden's amazing. This is a hoo-ha, the only person that can make shit happen is you. And I was willing to give up everything. I was willing to lose my leg. Genuinely speaking, I would have lost my leg to play rugby, which is not a healthy thing. But if you want an extreme outcome, you have to be willing to sacrifice something. And I'd given up everything for everybody else, and this was my moment. Anyway, this is where my coaching practice came into play. Whilst I was injured, I've been a PT. I've worked in a gym since I was 14. I've been a PT since I was 16, of gym instructor, personal trainer. And because I was injured, I had my wage halved from Donny, which is fair. They're lucky they kept me on. They shouldn't have kept me on, which they were willing to pay me a basic rate to just keep me. I was working in a school as a supply teacher, and I did PT at physio. Shout out Chapman Physio, Vicky, I missed you. Legend. And that's where suddenly I was putting things into practice. Health, energy, performance, lifestyle and behavior, for rehab, for training, for different types of athletes. I worked as an S&C coach in a private school. I've worked as an S&C coach for a physio. I'd had my own personal training boot camp. I started going across these sort of physical spheres and learning the art of coaching through physical fitness. And unfortunately, after 2 years with Donny, we parted ways. And I stayed semi-pro for 4 years, and I was at Hull Ionians. And I suddenly just had this premonition that I needed to go and start to discover more about life. Moved to Manly, Australia. Shout out to the Marlins. I went and played over there. And I was lucky enough, I met Rach. I can't remember how long. It would have been 8 months, 9 months before. Maybe a bit longer. And I still love her, remember that. She was going for Rio Olympics. She's a GB swimmer. And she missed that by 0.1 of a second. She ended up coming to Australia with me. And this is where I kind of changed my life. I suddenly realized life was way bigger than just sport. I suddenly realized that the things that I had in sport were massively prevalent inside of my process, but they weren't just me. I was multiple different spheres, multiple different identities. I was a boyfriend. I was a rugby player. I was a friend. I was a son. I was a confidant for those that needed me. I was a coach. I was a consultant. I had all these different hats on. I didn't really understand how to articulate them. And actually, the thing that built this all together was actually understanding what I needed to rebuild and what I needed to redirect. And I went from Australia back to Hull, decided I got offered a job offer in Singapore, and that's when my life changed. I moved to Singapore to UFIT underneath Django, and that's where my coaching practice took hold of not just being athlete performance or human performance. I realized I was working in the CBD, I was working with people that were heads of banks. I was working with people that were owning multi-billion-dollar firms. I was working with people that sold out of companies for hundreds of millions of dollars. I was working with fund managers and all these sort of people who are aliens on paper. They all had human performance issues, but a lot of their bottlenecks were mental capacity issues. And I personally, when I left sport, I struggled. If you ask who Will Foden was, he was a rugby player. That was it. When I left sport after I was playing for Wanderers, fortunately enough, and I was on the pitch and I just didn't have the level of fire I used to have. I just thought this is just a job. And I got blindsided by someone, cheap shot. It wasn't even a good cheap shot. I was raging. I was on the side of a mall and he looked round, ran in and shoulder charged me. And he blew my rib out my chest, which I've still got a calcification on now. And I realised I couldn't play rugby and be a PT. So I just quit. I just said that was it, done. And I was working as a personal trainer, honing my craft. And I had a client there who was a fat boy, excuse my French, telling me that the only way that you can do nutrition to get lean or whatever he wanted to do was ketogenic dieting. And I started challenging him. I've been a nutritionist at that point for nearly 10 years. And he basically insinuated that because he's paying me for me to shut the fuck up. And I lost it. I nearly filled him in. And I walked into the One Championship gym Evolve and I just said, I need to fight. But I can't do striking because I get knocked out. What can I do? And that's where I found jiu-jitsu. And again, there's a big overarching theme of that rebuild and redirect, because the reality was that I was rebuilding me personally, I was rebuilding me professionally, I was rebuilding me from an athlete performance standpoint, and I was redirecting that energy into the next thing. I see so many athletes, ex-athletes or business owners and founders struggle with this one concept of you're not just one thing. And that's what happened to me. Now, the bridge and the piece that I was in, of course, mentioned, I was in Singapore for 5 years. This is where I started the Stay Strong Collective. We brought Stay Strong Collective back home after COVID, which is an online athletic performance coaching firm. I worked with professional athletes to weekend warriors who wanted to just train hard, energy, bandwidth, nutrition, to getting doing NLP qualifications, mental skills qualifications, and then realizing actually. In Singapore, I had NLP coaching from Jay Headley. Shout out to him for the coaching room. That changed my life, and that's where I realised that the bit that gave professionals their edge was how they actually developed and incubated mental capacity. And that's where I'm more learning around identity. In another video, I'm going to be talking about understanding your identity, how to leverage that from a science principle standpoint, rather than a wushu, high in the sky book theory piece. I'm going to teach you a bit about high performance identity and how to leverage it in times that matter. That'll be in the link somewhere. I came home and I started consulting and coaching. So I had mental performance consulting, and then I had physical human performance coaching. And I was a performance coach, but I was dealing with two totally different spheres. And the reason why Built for Pressure was born was because I recognized that pressure was not the problem for these individuals, infrastructure was. And infrastructure is the gap between physical and psychological performance that actually allows you to lead at a higher frequency. And after being in Singapore for 5 years and dealing with those sorts of individuals, I realized that they bleed the same. A billionaire or a bin man, they're the same person, just a different job title. But what I specialize in is finding the detail that matters to help leverage more capacity in somebody's process for them to actually live, lead, and perform in the times that matter. That's the key piece from here. So Built for Pressure was born, and this is where we've headed very much into the executive performance space, helping founders, leaders, and business owners build infrastructure within their process to lead in times that matter. I was born through sport as a consultant, as a person, and I used that adversity to leverage physiological and psychological performance for my customers. So anyway, I digress. That's an oversight about who I am, what I do, and what Built for Pressure is. If you'd like to learn more about what our company does and how it operates and how it can maybe help you, there'll be links in the bio to follow, and I'll catch you guys soon.